Are there two different creation accounts in Genesis, and what does that mean for us? When I first became a Christian back in 1998, I started to read my Bible, starting in Genesis, of course. I wondered why there appeared to be two different Genesis accounts. As I looked for answers, I got quite a few options. The first one, which I thought to be the most out there response, was that God created everything like he said in Genesis 1, but seemingly didn't like the creation he made and destroyed humanity and everything on earth and started again with Genesis 2. When I asked why they believed this, they said because the only thing that made sense why there was two seemingly different accounts. This theory seems to have a few flaws in it, starting with the most obvious that Genesis 2 doesn't mention or even hint at in the context that Genesis 1 and 2 are unconnected. The second is that it would appear that Noah's account of nearly wiping the world from existence appears to be the first time that God has tried to reset the world. Nowhere in the Bible is there any mention of a previous earth or creation of God, for this appears to be the first and only because God doesn't make mistakes. Lastly, we know that God loves the world so deeply that from the very start he wanted to save it from itself, and destroying it would defeat the purpose of creation. The next option I was given in high school was it doesn't matter why, how, or when of the Genesis accounts, but I should just take it at face value and know that both are true and we must blindly trust the Bible. This also didn't seem to sit well with me because I know God created us to be like him, and that means we are logical, smart, and clearly can find solutions to issues without throwing our hands up in the air saying we don't know. Blind faith makes us sound like we don't even need to study or understand why the universe is the way it is. We are created with a sense of wonder, curiosity, and adventure that we need to find answers even if in the end we don't fully understand. It could also be that I never liked the term blind faith because we know and trust in God to have everything in hand. The Bible has been tested time and time again from all kinds of people, but it still holds up. Thus, I concluded that there has to be an answer to why there seems to be two different accounts. Fast forward to Bible college, to where this question still seems to be the focus on other people's minds, as well in my Pentateuch class. The Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The only problem was that the more we seemed to talk about the issue, the more questions that seemed to come up, from historical fiction to Israel's responding to neighbors, to finally that it's all true, thus there must be a solution. The goal of this video is not to give you a definitive answer to the question, but to leave you with a few options to choose from. Some of you may be young earth creationists and need answers to fit those beliefs. Others of you may be evolutionists and need something to fit into that box. The goal is never to alienate the other side, but to give answers that might be a solution to the problem that we may never solve until we meet God and ask him face to face. The first creation event in Genesis 1 starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Very first thing that was created was light. From there, the water and skies were separated and formed, moving on to land and vegetation. To parallel those, inside of this, we have the stars and the moon were created to parallel the light. The sea creatures and birds were created to parallel the water and the sky. And then lastly, land animals were created along with humanity, pairing it with the creation of land. As you can see, there was a nice parallel between the two sides where one thing was created and then something was created to use those areas. Finally, the completion of the universe was done and God rested on the last day. The word beginning in Hebrew is not always the same as in English, but at times can be. But in the context of Genesis chapter 1, it's more stating a starting point of creation, not necessarily the beginning of time. Genesis 1:1 can be thought of as an introductory title more than anything actually being created in that verse. and that what follows is what deems to be created of the heavens and earth. Though it should be seen that God is the creator of all things, of the cosmos to the earth's finest details. The second creation account appears to start at a different time than the first. In Genesis 2:4-6, it appears that they're starting on the third day if you were to use the Genesis 1 timelines. In chapter 2, verse 7, Adam is created for humanity, which would be a day 6 event for Genesis 1. We move on to verses 8-14, where we see the first signs of vegetation and the description of the land, which would be day 3. Next, Adam is put into the garden to rule it, which also would be day 6. And then all the animals appear to be created, which is a day 5 and day 6 event. Finally, woman is created on day 6. As you can see from a very quick glance that it jumps back and forth. Day 3, day 6, day 3, day 6, day 5, day 6, and then day 6. So just at a quick look, it would appear that we need to find some sort of answer to this unordered event in Genesis 2. Now, some would argue that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are meant to be read together as a continuation of each other in light of the fall that's about to happen in chapter 3 and in light of everything else in Genesis. You must remember that chapters and verses were not added until much later, around the 13th and 16th century respectively. Thus, this would change the understanding of how we should read these sections as in context of the whole and not the individual parts. This would put the shrubs and no plants in context of the fall, where there would be wild thistles and thorns, and now that man has to work the ground to plant food because he now must toil for it. The reference to not send rain would be in sight of Noah, where God has not sent rain to wipe out humanity. In fact, it would appear that both of these accounts work together and are in one the same with just different levels of detail. Lastly, to tie it all together, in verse 19 of Genesis chapter 2, where the animals appear to be made after Adam, but after a closer reading in the Hebrew, it could be used as a pluperfect rather than a perfect form, meaning that God could have created them in the past, and it says that God had created the animals, and he was just bringing them all to Adam, thus avoiding the iteration of Adam being created after the animals, but the animals were already there and Adam was just being shown them. This would mean the order of which Genesis 1 seems to be in fact the exact same order and telling of Genesis 2. Okay, so even after all of that, you may not believe that these accounts work together, but you still believe that God created everything, then there's still a split answer for you. The first chapter of Genesis 1 could be a response to the world around them, and Israel needs to create a creation account to seem relevant to them, thus leaving Genesis 2 and Adam and Eve as true because Jesus and the apostles seem to see Adam as a real person. Jesus is also mentioned to be the second Adam. In Luke chapter 3, the historical records traces Jesus all the way from himself all the way back to Adam. There are older texts found, like the Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh, that share similar events and stories as found in Genesis. Some believe that the biblical accounts came first and other accounts are just poor knockoffs. Others claim that Israel wanted to combat the stories and elements of chaos in their time, and they created a creation story so that God would be the conqueror of chaos over the water and the world. These studies and arguments are still going on, but can lead us to see that the Genesis account is unique of creation and might not be history, but a story putting God in a league of his own. Well, we've gone through two options, option A and option B, and if those don't work for you, you could very well be in the Christian evolutionist camp. Yes, they are real, and they do believe in Jesus as well. While the evolutionists would say that Genesis 1 is just a story or poetry or whatever, and they would also put the second account into question because the inability to reconcile a 14 billion years history to whittle it down to 10,000 years of humanity. This option also takes some faith because it often believes that Adam and Eve were not just two people, but in fact from a tribe or a group of people, and Adam and Eve were chosen to be the prime example of humanity by God, thus preserving the Jesus' claim of them being real, but allowing for evolution to be the mechanism. Now, if these three options don't fit what you understand, there is wiggle room in each of these options, allowing for a little bit of personality. I know that the evolutionist side actually has, I believe, 6 other options inside of itself, dating the 20,000 or 200,000 year history of humanity and picking of Adam and how it's done. I know there's 6 groups inside of just that section, so make sure you guys go read some books, ask more questions, and we can delve deeper into these things, because let's face it, inside of the Bible there is a lot of wiggle room for different types of options, because it's very hard to nail down one specific answer. But I do have a 4th option for everybody that I'm not going to cover here, that allows young earth creationists to be true and allows the evolutionists to be true, and it works together as I call it my unified creation theory, which allows everyone to be true, every option to be true. We will cover that in a later episode, probably way down, because it is a 40-page paper that I would have to dwindle down for you guys for just a little bit. But there are lots of different answers out there. These are just the 3 major options for you. Thank you all for watching, and I am now curious to know where everyone falls under the umbrella, whether you're Group A, Group B, Group C, or some variation of it. I would love to know where you guys stand. Please no judgment, please no arguments. Let the comments be a lively discussion and understanding on all sides. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.